The United Healthcare CEO shooting has drawn a lot of media and public attention. And it has intrigued not just the United States, but the entire world probably. I mean, just look at the resources used by NYPD and the FBI, the perp walk, double charges by the state and feds, the tone-deaf behavior by the majority of the media, the backlash by the people on social media, and at the same time, the overwhelming support of the people for Luigi Mangione, the alleged shooter.
We have to fight for our lives on a phone.
Medical bill shouldn't be $450,000 a year. I can't afford that. Only state insurance can afford that, and I have to be poor in order to get my medications paid for.
Murder's not justified
At all.
but he brought the people together.
We are talking about a generation, the younger generation who clearly thinks differently from their older counterparts. And the world belongs to them as much as it does to anybody else. A generation raised on active shooter drills is being asked to condemn violence in corner offices while their insulin rationing family members or relatives or neighbors just die. They just die.
Because of how these insurance companies treat people when they are at their most vulnerable, after we've all given them our money every fucking month, and now we finally need you, and all you do is deny us. And then these pussies and all of these things are taking the pictures of their CEOs off their websites. You know, I got to be honest with you, okay? I love that that fucking CEOs are fucking afraid right now. You should be. By and large, you're all a bunch of selfish, greedy fucking pieces of shit, and a lot of you are mass murderers. You just don't pull the trigger. That's why it looks clean. That's why these people look, oh my God, oh, he was just, you know, walking into a hotel. It's like, okay, but what was his job? What did he do? What was the results of it?
There's something really horrible and somewhat inevitable about a healthcare executive being gunned down in Manhattan by someone who probably learned to hide from a bad guy with a gun before they learned anything about life. What exactly did America expect when it raised an entire generation on duck and cover? Just think about it. All the kids are taught that death could come for them at any moment, in any classroom. And the best advice adults could offer them was try to make yourself smaller. It's just a sad reality these kids have lived in. I mean, I don't know about you, but hearing from the shocked corner office clutching corporate America about this senseless violence hits different when they're talking to a generation that grew up doing active shooter drills between homeroom and algebra. We're talking about kids who learned to build barricades before they learned about the Boston Tea Party, who knew what an exit strategy from the school is before they knew what SAT stood for, who got texts from their parents saying, I love you, buddy, every time there was a shooting anywhere in the country, just in case their school was next. Just imagine at that impressionable age. And I mean, just since Columbine in 1999, the United States has had more than 400 school shootings. Folks, that's not a statistic anymore. It's an engineered generational trauma. That's what it is. Every single person under 30 in America today grew up knowing that at any moment, their classroom could become a war zone. And unlike the CEOs in their corner offices, they couldn't just deny coverage for the threat and make it go away. Let's try to put some numbers to this trauma. By 2019, more than 95% of public schools ran active shooter drills. A generation of kids spent 20 years learning to hide from death between social studies and lunch. More than 390,000 students have experienced gun violence at school since Columbine. That's roughly the population of Pittsburgh walking around with invisible scars. The frequency? Horrifying. In 1999, these drills happened maybe once a year. By 2016, nearly 40% of schools were running them monthly. Today, some elementary schools drill as often as once a week. You're talking about 5-year-olds learning to be quiet as mice, so the bad man won't find them before they have even learned to tie their shoelaces. And the psychological damage? It's exactly what you would expect when you teach kids they could die at any moment. Studies show these drills trigger severe anxiety, depression, and PTSD-like symptoms in children. Teachers report kids wetting themselves during drills, having panic attacks, and writing goodbye letters to their parents in elementary school. Some kids are now showing the same clinical stress markers as actual combat veterans. We have literally traumatized kids in the name of protecting them from trauma. Ironic, isn't it? And here's the thing about trauma. It doesn't just evaporate when you hand kids a high school diploma. Ask any combat veteran how that works. After World War II, we saw a generation of people return home with what we now call PTSD, leading to waves of violence, substance abuse, domestic abuse, and just collective devastation. Today, while we claim to support our troops, more than 35,000 veterans remain homeless on any given night, and 22 veterans die by suicide every single day today. Well, they signed up for war. Somebody says coldly. Okay, but this generation signed up for kindergarten, and now these kids have grown up. They are in their 20s and 30s, carrying invisible backpacks of trauma into their adult lives. They're working jobs, paying taxes, and watching healthcare executive like Brian Thompson use AI algorithms to deny coverage to cancer patients while pocketing multi-million-dollar bonuses. The same generation that learned to text "I love you," "goodbye" from under their desks is now being asked to feel shocked and empathetic to someone. They might respond to systematic corporate violence with reciprocal violence. United Healthcare's AI denial system had a 90% error rate in rejecting claims. Dude, that's not a mistake. That's a very deliberate business strategy. While Thompson was cashing his $10.2 million compensation package, Americans were rationing insulin and dying from treatable diseases.
Killing of the United Healthcare Division CEO on the streets of Manhattan. Manhattan prosecutors called it a killing that was intended to evoke terror. Would you consider him a terrorist? Is this domestic violent extremism?
The rhetoric on social media following that murder is extraordinarily alarming. It speaks of what is really bubbling here in this country, and unfortunately, we see that manifested in violence. The domestic violent extremism that exists, the threat of it in the United States is one of the great threat streams that we must...
You want to talk about violence? Let's talk about how many people died because healthcare executive decided their lives weren't worth covering. Let's talk about the violence of telling a parent their child's cancer treatment is experimental. Let's talk about the violence of forcing people to choose between medicine and food. This isn't about justifying what happened to Thompson, but maybe, just maybe, we shouldn't be surprised when a generation raised on lockdown drills and mass shooter alerts doesn't shed a tear when violence breaches the ivory towers. Every year since 1999, America handed its children trauma as a graduation present. And now what? We are shocked these kids grew up to be traumatized adults? Shocked that a generation who was taught that death could come for them at any moment now gives zero fucks about lectures on the sanctity of life from the generation who turned death into profit margins? So yes, mourn Brian Thompson if you like, Fox, about that American dream if you must, NBC, and maybe save some of that grief for the generation that had to learn about mortality rates before they learned multiplication tables. For the kids who grew up knowing the best hiding spots in every room they entered. For the teenagers who graduated high school knowing more about tactical response than trigonometry. This is the world we enabled. When we raise a generation in the shadow of gun violence, we can't be surprised when they stop fearing it, and can't be shocked when they stop condemning it. The school shooting generation is all grown up, and wouldn't you know it, they listen to the endless lectures about accepting violence. Thank you.